A man of science who abandoned reason for faith and abandoned hospital where impossible things began to happen. What they witnessed in those basement rooms would be denied by authorities for decades. In the cold winter of 1948, in the shadows of Detroit's industrial decline, Dr. Edmund Holloway began his final experiment. The results would be sealed away until now. Attention! The case you're about to hear was hidden for decades. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is at this exact moment, because this story began at exactly the same hour. The old Mercy Hospital stood abandoned on the outskirts of Detroit for nearly 2 decades, its limestone facade blackened by industrial smoke, its windows boarded with warped plywood that groaned during winter storms. But on the evening of January 12, 1948, lights appeared in the basement windows. Locals reported seeing a small convoy of vehicles arrive under cover of darkness. No one questioned it. The building had been government property since the war. What no one knew was that Dr. Edmund Holloway, once a respected neurologist at Johns Hopkins University, had convinced the Department of Defense to grant him access to the facility. His promised research supposedly involved trauma recovery for returning soldiers, but his personal journals, discovered decades later, revealed a far different intention. The smell of dust and chemical preservatives filled the air as Holloway led his small team through the deteriorating corridors. The sound of their footsteps echoed across the empty halls. Water damage had left constellation patterns across the ceiling tiles. Everything smelled of decay and abandonment. "This facility will serve our purposes perfectly," Holloway noted in his journal that night. "The isolation provides security from unwanted observation. The electrical system remains functional, and the temperature in the basement rooms is consistently cold. Perfect for our subjects." But what subjects was Holloway referring to? The official grant mentioned only neurological studies in trauma patients. Yet the equipment delivered to Mercy Hospital that January night included specialized refrigeration units and monitoring systems far beyond what would be needed for standard medical research. According to records from Detroit Edison Company, the power consumption at the supposedly abandoned hospital suddenly increased by 300%. When questioned years later, company representatives claimed no such records existed, but one former employee saved the documents. The team Holloway assembled was unusual for a medical research project. Besides 2 medical doctors, he recruited Father Thomas Mackey, a Catholic priest who had served as a military chaplain. Also present was Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a specialist in electrical engineering who had worked on classified government projects during the war. The 5th team member, listed only as observer in Holloway's notes, remains unidentified to this day. Holloway's earlier career had been marked by brilliant but increasingly controversial research into brain activity during near-death experiences. His colleagues at Johns Hopkins described a man transformed after the death of his wife Catherine from tuberculosis in 1945. The rational scientist became increasingly obsessed with religious texts, particularly obscure Catholic writings about resurrection and the nature of the soul. "Science has only mapped the shore of a vast ocean," he wrote in a letter to the dean before his dismissal from the university. "I have glimpsed what lies beneath those waters. The soul is not metaphorical. It is measurable. It is detectable. And under the right conditions, it can be called back." The first phase of the Mercy Hospital project appeared conventional enough. Equipment was installed, electrical systems were upgraded, chemical supplies were catalogued and stored. But hidden among mundane requisition forms was an unusual request to the military: delivery of subjects meeting specific criterion of expiration. On January 23, 1948, A military transport arrived at Mercy Hospital before dawn. According to the sole witness, an elderly man who lived in a small house across the field from the hospital, 4 flag-draped containers were unloaded and taken into the basement entrance. The witness assumed they were medical supplies. Weather records confirm it was snowing heavily that morning, limiting visibility. Dr. Chen's technical journal, recovered from her personal effects after her death in 1972, contains the first indication of what was really happening at Mercy Hospital. Her entries, clinical and detached, describe the installation of a modified electroencephalogram capable of detecting what she called extremely low-frequency neural oscillations. Dr. Holloway believes standard medical equipment lacks sensitivity to detect what he terms residual consciousness, she wrote. Our modified system amplifies signals by a factor of 1,000. Initial calibration shows promising results, though the baseline readings show unexpected patterns that may indicate equipment interference. What becomes clear through these fragmentary records is that Holloway was no longer conducting trauma research. He was attempting to detect and ultimately restore neural activity in deceased subjects. The subjects delivered that snowy January morning were not medical supplies. They were human remains. The Catholic Church has repeatedly denied any official knowledge of or involvement in the Mercy Hospital experiments. But Father Mackey's personal diary, discovered in the archives of St. Catherine's Parish in 1981, tells a different story. His entries reveal a man torn between scientific curiosity and spiritual doubt. I have come to believe that Dr. Holloway may be correct, wrote Father Mackey on February 2nd. The boundary between life and death is not as absolute as we have been taught. The soul lingers. It seeks to return. Our instruments detect this presence, even when the body shows no conventional signs of life. I pray for guidance as we walk into territory where science and faith become indistinguishable from one another. The first official experiment was conducted on February 10, 1948. The subject, identified only as S1 in the documents, was a male approximately 30 years of age. Cause of death was listed as cardiac failure resulting from electrical accident. Time since clinical death was recorded as 96 hours. Dr. Chen's notes describe the procedure with unsettling precision. The subject was connected to the modified electroencephalogram. Baseline readings were taken for 60 minutes. Then a series of electrical impulses were administered according to a pattern Holloway called the restoration sequence. Nothing happened. The procedure was repeated with increased amplitude. Again, no response was recorded. It was what happened next that transformed the Mercy Hospital project from failed experiment to something far more disturbing. Father Mackey's diary describes how Holloway, facing failure, abandoned scientific protocol. Holloway dismissed Dr. Peters from the room, wrote Father Mackey. He asked me to administer last rites, which I did, though the subject had been deceased for days. Then Holloway did something unexpected. He placed his hands on the subject's chest and began to pray, not in Latin or any liturgical language, but in what sounded like ancient Hebrew mixed with something else. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, the lights flickered, and then the machine began to register activity where there should be none. Dr. Chen's technical notes confirm an inexplicable reading on the electroencephalogram lasting approximately 3 minutes. She attributed it to equipment malfunction due to power fluctuation. But her private notes contain a different observation. For 187 seconds we detected clear neural oscillation patterns consistent with deep meditative states. There is no scientific explanation for this phenomenon. The subject remained clinically deceased by all other measures. Dr. Holloway believes we have detected the returning consciousness. I remain uncertain. After this unexpected result, the nature of the experiments changed dramatically. Holloway began integrating religious elements into what had begun as scientific procedures. Catholic prayers were mixed with fragments from Hebrew texts. Conventional medical monitoring was supplemented with obscure measurements of electrical fields that Holloway claimed could detect soul energy. The team worked in isolation for weeks. Power consumption at the facility continued to increase. Neighbors reported strange lights in the basement windows during the night, and unusual sounds that some described as mechanical humming, while others called it chanting. On March 19th, the project changed again. A new subject, S4, was delivered to the facility. According to the transportation manifest, this subject had been deceased for only 24 hours. Cause of death was listed as respiratory failure due to pneumonia. The experiment conducted that night is documented in 3 separate accounts, all of which contain disturbing inconsistencies. Dr. Chen's technical log reports multiple equipment failures. Father Mackey's diary describes intense cold and a presence that could be felt but not seen. Holloway's own notes, usually meticulous, become almost illegible, with fragments that suggest a breakthrough. The subject responded to the combined protocol, he wrote. Measurable electrical activity in the brain persisted for 17 minutes. Involuntary muscle contractions observed in the facial region and extremities. Father Mackey administered the prayers while I maintained physical contact and focus. Dr. Chen confirmed independent electrical activity not generated by our equipment. We are close to validation. The soul can be called back. Catherine will return to me. This last line, referencing his deceased wife, appears nowhere else in the official documentation. It suggests Holloway's scientific objectivity had been completely compromised by personal grief. The experiments continued through March and into April. With each subject, the duration of detected activity increased. Holloway became increasingly convinced that they were temporarily restoring consciousness to the deceased. Father Mackey's entries show growing religious doubt as theological concepts of resurrection collided with the disturbing reality of their work. What we are detecting cannot be the soul as understood by the Church, he wrote on April 7th. The patterns suggest something fragmented, confused. If we are calling back the dead, we are calling back only pieces. I no longer sleep through the night. I hear voices in my dreams speaking words I cannot understand. Dr. Holloway appears increasingly euphoric with each experiment, but I feel only growing dread. On April 20th, 1948, the project reached its climax. A new subject, designated S7, arrived at the facility. The documentation on this subject is heavily redacted, with only a physical description remaining. Female, approximately 35 years of age, brown hair, cause of death listed as tuberculosis. Multiple witness accounts suggest this subject bore a striking resemblance to Catherine Holloway. How Holloway managed to obtain his wife's remains, presumably exhumed 3 years after her burial, remains unknown. No exhumation permit exists in public records. What happened that night is documented only in fragments. The electrical system in the entire hospital overloaded at 11:17 in the evening, causing a localized blackout. The backup generators activated, but repeatedly failed. Temperature sensors recorded a drop of 30 degrees in the main laboratory over a span of 4 minutes. Father Mackey's diary contains only one line about that evening. God forgive us for what we've done. Dr. Chen's technical log ends abruptly mid-entry. Extreme electromagnetic disturbance detected throughout facility. Subject showing unprecedented levels of neural activity. Dr. Holloway administering combined protocol. Facial muscles showing coordinated movement. Eyes opened at 11:22. Subject appeared to focus specifically on Holloway and attempted to... The remainder of the page is missing. The official Department of Defense report, declassified in 1979, states simply that the Mercy Hospital research project was terminated on April 21st, 1948, due to inconclusive results and budget constraints. All equipment was removed from the facility within 24 hours. The subjects were reportedly cremated, following standard military protocol for research remains. But a handwritten note found in the personal effects of the unidentified observer tells a different story. Protocol breach, 11:22 p.m. Subject 7 gained consciousness for approximately 6 minutes. Subject recognized Holloway and spoke his name. Subject displayed extreme distress and made statements in her own voice that indicated full awareness of her condition. Termination protocol initiated when subject attempted to disconnect from equipment. Holloway had to be physically restrained. Project classified level 7 and immediately terminated. All personnel remanded to military custody for debriefing and observation. In the aftermath, the team scattered. Dr. Chen returned to academic research but published nothing for 7 years. Father Mackey requested reassignment to missionary work in South America and never returned to the United States. The unidentified observer presumably continued working for the government in classified roles. Dr. Edmund Holloway disappeared completely from public record after April 21st, 1948. No death certificate exists. No further academic or medical work bears his name. He simply vanished. The Mercy Hospital building was demolished in 1952. Official explanation cited structural concerns, but the demolition occurred with unusual speed and security. Several witnesses reported that the basement level was completely excavated, with the soil removed in sealed containers. For decades, the entire incident remained buried in classified archives and fragmented personal accounts. But in 1977, a night watchman at a government storage facility in Maryland discovered a box of records mistakenly left unclassified. Before the documents were resealed, he made copies of several pages. These fragments suggest that whatever happened at Mercy Hospital continued to trouble government officials for years. Internal memos reference ongoing monitoring of energy signatures consistent with the Detroit anomalies. A 1954 report mentions localized temperature decreases and electrical disturbances near the grave sites of former research subjects. Most disturbing is a handwritten note dated December 12, 1949, nearly 20 months after the project's termination. It appears to be from a psychiatric evaluation. Patient continues to insist that his wife speaks to him nightly, claims she is trapped between states and unable to fully return or fully depart. D. Patient's physical condition, deteriorating despite no diagnosable illness. Recommend continued observation and increased sedation. The note bears no signature or patient name, but is marked with the same security classification as the Mercy Hospital files. In 1963, a fire destroyed most of the remaining records related to the project. The government maintains this was an accident resulting from improper storage of chemicals in the same facility. Others suggest a deliberate attempt to erase evidence of the experiments. For the families of the subjects used in these experiments, there is no closure. Military records of the bodies provided to the Mercy Hospital project were allegedly lost in a separate archival accident in 1957. Without names, there can be no proper accounting of whose remains were used, or whether they were properly laid to rest after the experiments concluded. Occasional reports of unusual phenomena at the former Mercy Hospital site persisted for decades. Construction workers preparing the land for redevelopment in 1971 reported equipment failures and unexplained cold spots. Several refused to continue working at the location. The development project was ultimately abandoned. The land remains vacant to this day. Local residents avoid the area after dark. Some report hearing a low humming sound on cold winter nights. Others describe a sense of being watched when passing the empty lot. Children in nearby neighborhoods share stories of the cold lady who appears when they play too close to the property line. Scientific analysis of Holloway's methods suggests he was combining early electroshock therapy with religious rituals and theoretical principles that wouldn't be explored by mainstream science until decades later. Some of his notes on electromagnetic fields and consciousness bear striking similarities to quantum theories developed in the 1970s. Was Holloway a madman driven by grief to pseudoscientific experiments? Or had he genuinely discovered something at the boundary between life and death that science was not ready to confront? The most compelling question remains unanswered. What happened to Subject 7 in those 6 minutes of apparent consciousness? What did Catherine Holloway experience after being called back from death? And what did she say that caused the immediate termination of the entire project? The fragmentary records provide only one clue, a partial transcription attributed to Subject 7. Edmund, what have you done? I was at peace. We are not meant to return. The others are watching now. The door. You've opened a door that cannot be. The transcription ends there. In 1984, an elderly man in a nursing home in Arizona claimed to be Thomas Mackey, the priest from the Mercy Hospital project. Medical records confirmed his identity, though he had been living under an assumed name for decades. In his final days, he reportedly spoke constantly about making amends and those we disturbed. A nurse recorded his final coherent statement. We thought we were calling them back to our world. We didn't understand. We were being called into theirs. They're still waiting. Holloway opened the door. Only faith can close it. Father Thomas Mackey died on April 20th, 1984. Exactly 36 years after the final Mercy Hospital experiment. The Department of Defense maintains that the Mercy Hospital project was a brief, unsuccessful experiment in trauma recovery that was quickly abandoned. All requests for further information are denied on grounds of national security. Detroit City records show that permits for construction on the former hospital site have been requested 7 times since 1971. Each project was abandoned before completion. The current owner of the property, a holding company with apparent government connections, has designated the land as indefinitely undevelopable. In 2012, ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by an independent research team detected unusual structural abnormalities beneath the former basement level of the hospital. Before these findings could be published, the researchers were served with a cease and desist order. Their equipment was confiscated under national security provisions. Some questions remained deliberately unanswered. Some doors remained deliberately closed. The last document related to the Mercy Hospital experiments is dated June 3, 1968. It is a request for continued surveillance of the site, approved by a military committee whose members' names are redacted. The final line reads simply, "Containment protocol remains in effect until otherwise directed. Annual power requirements approved. Perimeter to be maintained indefinitely." No new records have been found. Some say none of this ever happened. Others prefer not to comment.